It's really funny. I feel like a lot of the things that we get, and maybe this is probably true for just based on what I know about your catalog, some of the things that we get the most notoriety for are the things that we're not necessarily like trying to do. I feel like that's
Yeah.
probably a lot of the case with you and
Yeah.
like some of your, because I know you said you have a credit with James Bay and on a Marshmello song and then a John Legend song as well, and
Yeah.
like a lot of that was engineering and guitar work, not necessarily producing and mixing
Yeah,
work.
exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, I mixed a
and that
live
I think
version of a
that
James Bay song, which was fun, but that was just I did that on headphones in like a half an hour, like it's,
yeah,
as it always
yeah,
goes. But no, in some ways, this it's funny. I have like those like guitar credits like James Bay, Marshmello, Ben Platt, and they come a lot from my friend Gian Stone, who's like a very successful producer out in LA. On just not to put too fine a point on it or whatever, but and the John Legend thing. But it was actually coming out of this question of, I was a guitar player originally, and I got to this place where I just felt like I wasn't useful on the guitar to anybody. So many guitar players, we play all the notes and we know all the theory and we got all the scales. But you're like, what am I bringing to this? And I kind of went through this phase of being really down on guitar and like, I don't even want to put guitar in my productions. Like, fuck the guitar. Like, who wants guitar? They all sound shitty in different ways. That's the whole identity of guitar, right? And I've come like sort of full circle. But my buddy Gian, who I shared this space with before he went out to LA, was shout out, always really supportive of my guitar playing. He was like, "Oh man, you're great. I love your guitar playing." I'd be like, I don't know. And he said he persisted. And as he, became more successful, he was gracious enough, and he still is. Like I did some from last night, letting me play on a lot of his stuff. And it really was like the answer to the question of how can I be useful on the guitar? And I was like, oh, like this. And it's very gratifying, even though it's more in the mainstream pop genre than I work, partly because just like I don't have access to those people, but also because it's more like personally I'm like bedroom pop, weird shit, whatever. And like I think it's satisfying in a different way, but and what I say, it's related to it's sort of it's like a world apart, but it's also related to what I do in terms of just asking the question of like, what is going to serve this project? Not like, what do I want it to be? But like, as a session musician, you're really asking, what am I being here? What am I here for to do? And you're doing that. And I try to make it a practice of like, just serving the song. It's like because again, guitar is my kryptonite because I'm so like, if I want to be that, it's like, I mean, I've really trained myself to not do that, I think, at this point, but it's like, how can I be as helpful as possible and add nothing beyond what's helpful? And
yeah.
it's a good kind of cross training for being a producer. Because when you're a
Well, I
producer, you
think
have more control. And if you want to bend
yeah.
things to your will, like you can kind of do that. But I think it's really important to resist that impulse across the board. So
I was talking with so I have a friend who's a Nashville guitar player, big session guy, like one of those guitar guys. You know
like
what I
a
mean?
real one. I'm not like a real session player. I just do these projects I'm graced with
Yeah,
that just come down from on high, and I do the best I can or whatever and send them off. But
yeah. He's like one of those 8 hours, 20 songs kind of session guys in
yeah.
Nashville. And we were talking, and he was like, "Yeah, man, it's crazy. I can play up and down this guitar, but most of the time I don't,
Yeah.
because you serve the song well, and if the producer needs more, they will ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Doing more out the gate is
Yeah.
more of a red flag to a tracking engineer or producer than it is the other
Yes.
way around.
What I try to do these days is say, this is what you asked for in red.
Yes.
Here's some other stuff if you want to play with it, but just delete it if you don't like it. And I find
Yeah.
that way it's like they can grab the like one measure of like, slide guitar and drop it in the thing or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think it's a really good fortunately for me, it was like I had this thing where I just completely rejected identifying as a guitar player, and then I was able to do session work. I was just like, I don't care. Like, don't use any of it. Like, change the key, like chop it up, whatever. If this helps, great. I love it. And I think I'm a little more attached and identified with like my work as like a producer, mixer, which is probably a problem. There's more ego involved, and I can just feel that when someone gives me mix notes, you're like,
you're like, ugh.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, why do I take this so personal? Like, and I try to remind myself what it was like to be that way as a guitar player and how good it felt to just be like, whatever, sure, yeah, I can do that differently.
Mm-hmm.
Want it brighter, want it darker. Yeah, it's like not being afraid of, not getting it 100% right every single time on the first time, which is like no one expects that or should,
No, no, nobody does. There are guys that can, and there are machines,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But
but
oftentimes,
us mortals
yes.
cannot.
But oftentimes those guys who are machines, they just need a certain input and they give a certain output, right?
Hmm.
It gets industrialized. And if you put the wrong input in, the output gets wonky. Like, and you
Yeah,
see that happen not to, with some of these big A-listers, it's like they just blow certain projects and they lose the
yeah.
projects too. Chad Blake was like saying in some video, was like, yeah, I lose like 90% of the projects I do because he
Oh
just has
wow.
such a specific, I mean, I don't know if that's true, but like it was some kind
Yeah.
of pithy thing about like basically I have a thing and people like hire me thinking that they want my thing, but then they realize they don't and it doesn't
Hmm.
work out. But I'm not gonna not do my thing. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I think like I feel like I identify with that more, except trying to head it off at the pass so you don't lose on the project or whatever. But like, but that
Yeah.
ethos of sort of saying like, yeah, no, like I'm a person. I do this thing that I hear certain things in a certain way, and like if you're gonna hire me, like you should kind of know that. I mean, for Chad
Yeah.
Blake, not me, but
For
like,
sure.
but yeah. Anyway, so I think trying to aspire towards that sort of combination of it's all about the song, but accepting like you're just like a person who hears things in a certain way, and you're going to need the input of the artist or the producer or
Yeah.
whatever to help direct you towards this goal, which doesn't just belong to you. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I think you're talking about like communicating with the artist. I think like another instance of I've mentioned this a couple times, trying as many things as possible, getting as many at bats as possible
yes,
is learning to do the deciphering part of that job is arguably one of the hardest parts of our
yeah,
job
yeah.
is taking words that make no sense and deciphering that into like this is going to sound good now.
Something I try to remind myself. Maybe this is getting into more like artist client work or
I
whatever,
mean,
which
I think it's
is
interesting
like
conversation. Yeah.
is not explaining to people why the way that they phrased it isn't quite sensical and what I'm going to do, and just saying okay and
Yeah.
giving it back. And it's like
Yes.
it's like someone's like someone was like, oh, can you just dial back the x percent? But it was like, well, no, this is just like a half a dozen moves sprinkled throughout, you can't just dial it back.
Yeah.
But instead of being it's and I may have even said, I might have been like, hey, so I can't dial it back per se, but I can do like I can kind of retry to do this move so it's a little bit less bright or whatever. But it was like
Sure.
probably I should have just been like, yes, sure, and then just done it, because who
Hmm.
needs to know other than you? And I
Yeah.
think there's a little bit
They
of
don't
like
know.
ego checking that I have to do with that stuff, and it's always better when I'm just like, yeah, totally, I'm gonna just do my job now, which is
Yeah.
interpret, try and decipher what you mean, ask a clarifying question, don't just be like sure and then fucking whatever, but like, and not feel the need to be understood, like
Hmm.
to have my, oh, woe is me, like understood by everybody. Like this sucks. Yeah, it's hard. You got to spend 3 hours tuning someone's vocals. Like they don't need to know that. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? And I think that's something early on. I see, people, I vent with, like everybody is, I'm sure. But
Sure.
even then realizing like you're never above what you're doing.
Hmm.
Like if you're doing it, you're not above it. So don't, I mean, I had this experience back in the day, doing some stuff that was like pretty brutal for not a lot of money, and there was a sense of some of my colleagues who were like involved that like maybe this is unfair and it was whatever, and I kind of had this feeling the whole time like, yeah, but then don't do it. It's like if
Yeah.
you're doing it, it means that's what you're doing. You said
Hmm.
yes, right? We're
Yep.
not really, we don't really have a gun to our heads at any
Yeah.
point.
You kind of signed up for this
Yeah, and,
by
and I mean,
saying
and just
yes.
broadly
Yeah.
as a career, I think is the more applicable thing of like this kind of like that is kind of like
Yeah.
the job of just like swallowing your pride and just saying yes and doing your
Yeah.
absolute best. Yeah.
Which I think if you're not, once again, if you're not down for that,
That's one of
then
the pain
it's
points.
it's not the job for you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like more the people who can't, they're just artists.
Hmm. Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah, it
But go
might be better. Yeah.
but go chase that.